Hi, I'm Dr. Penny DeBale. I've been teaching and researching in the areas of artificial intelligence, computer graphics, animation and computer games for over 25 years in both Australia and Europe. And along the way, I've written a book or two that are used in hundreds of universities. I've taught students all over the world how to produce amazing results with the Unity game engine to bring their projects to life. Now I'm thrilled to bring my expertise to you through Udemy. In this video, I'm going to present an extract from my animation course. In it, I'll take you through some of the nuts and bolts of the Unity Mecanim system. All of my videos are workshop based, so fire up your computer and Unity and follow along. Animations work by showing single frames in quick succession. These frames are presented on a timeline. In Unity, the timeline is in the animation window. By using the mouse, the animation can be examined frame by frame by dragging across the timeline. This process is called scrubbing. Although you might consider animation as the movement of a character, in fact anything that changes over time is an animation. Take for example this cube. Its colour has been animated to change between red and white. In this instance, the colour has been animated. Any numerical value can be animated. The one we are most familiar with is position. Here is a sphere that is animated to move up and down. Its movement is along the y-axis. As the animation plays, you can see the sphere's y position changing value. The same thing would happen if you grabbed the sphere in the scene and started moving it up and down manually. Animation, though, allows the movement to be automated. Instead of setting the position of the sphere in each frame, which would be extremely laborious, we employ keyframes. Keyframes are key moments in the animation that record the value of the properties that we are going to animate, whether they be colour or position. Once keyframes are set, an animation is automatically calculated between each in a process called in-betweening, or more fondly known as tweening. The software takes the values of the properties set at each keyframe and calculates what the values should be for each frame in between, based on how many frames there are. For example, let's say that we have a ball at position y equals 10 in frame 1. We set this as a keyframe. Then we want the ball to be at position y equals 1 in frame 10. So we set another keyframe. The computer then calculates how much the ball needs to move between y equals 10 and y equals 1 over the number of frames between. In this case, it works out to be -1 each time. Keyframes and tweening are the key components of creating animations in Unity. To combine animation states together, we need to use an animator. In this lecture, I'll show you how to create an animation with complex animation states. So to begin with, if you'd like to follow along, you can get hold of the Open Closed Door project that comes with this lecture. You'll also find it on my website. Okay, so to begin, once you've opened up the project, you'll be looking at a door. Now this door comes in a few different pieces. There's a main body to the door, which is the entire door. And then it has a door frame, which is around the outside. And then there's this door object itself, which is this particular door. And this is the one we want to animate. So we're going to animate this door to slide up and down. All right, so to begin with, let's create an opening and closing animation, as well as a few other different states. So first of all, let's go into Animator. Now with the door selected, this is the animation window that we used in the previous lecture, we're going to create an animation and we'll call that close. So we'll save that. And this animation is just going to be the door in closed state, which is the way it already is. So let's add a property in the animation transform, and we're going to be animating its position, which will give us two keyframes, one at 0 and one at 1. So this is the default, and it will also keep the current Y position of the door, which happens to be, in this case, 0.14. And so we don't want that to move at all in this closed animation. Okay, so we're now going to create another animation, and we'll call that open. So go to the top of the animation window. This is where close is written, and go create new clip. And we will call this open. Before we set any keyframes in the open animation, we'll move the door to its open position. So make sure the door is selected in the hierarchy and drag it up. Okay, we're selecting the door itself, not the other components that are around it. So the parent, which is door, is not being animated. It's just the child part of the door. So that will be its open position, and you can see that the animation created a keyframe automatically for us in position 0. Now we're going to then also go to 1 second and add another keyframe on the value that changed. So in this case, you can see that it changed the Y position. So we can just click next to the Y position and go add key, and that will add a Y position for that door in the up or open position. Right, so the next animations we want to create is the movement between the open position and the closing position. Since the door is already in the open position in this particular clip, we'll start with the door closing animation. So let's go back to the animation window and create a new clip and call it closing. Then save that. Okay, now the property, again, we're modifying is the transform Y position. So let's add that in. So currently the closing will look like the open because it's got our default 2 keyframes we created. But the final keyframe here for the Y is where we want that door to be closed. Now, if you want that final key of close to be the same position as the closed door, then you can actually select the Y position, which is this one here, and set this key for Y back to what it was in the closed position. Now that was a 0.14 from memory. Let's just check that. So if we go to the closed animation and we just click in here, you'll see that it is 0.14 when it's in the closed position. So let's go back to closing and to the final keyframe here, and we can just type that in there, 0.14 for our closed door. Now we'll see when we play through this animation that we have closing. Right, so with the door now at the closed position, let's create the opening animation. So create new clip, opening, add property, transform, position add, and we're now going to open so that in the 0 position we're at 0.14, which is what we want. And to open it, we have to open it at 1 second to the height. So let's just go back and look at the open position and see what its height is. So it's 4.2. In the opening animation, we can then go to that keyframe for the Y and set that to 4.2. And now when we scrub through this, you'll see that we have an opening animation. Right, so we've now created the 4 animations that we need to have the door open and close. The next step is to create what's called an animation state machine, which will connect all of these different animation states and make them run smoothly. When we start creating an animation, the object that you're creating the animation for gets a Animator controller added to it. And in the inspector under door, you can see that there is this Animator component and its controller is named door. So this was automatically created. If we double click on this, it's going to open up this Animator view. The Animator view is a different window to the animation view, even though they're named similarly. I'm going to drag it over here so that we can see our door. We've got our scene in our game. And then we've got this Animator view. Now you can move around in there by holding down the Alt key and dragging the mouse around. What you'll notice inside this view is we've got these states, and these are the ones we've just created, our animation states. In the Animator, you can choreograph the way that these animation states are going to play. Currently, if you have a look, they're not connected by anything. There's this entry green node that we call the states, and it has an arrow, which we call a transition, going to the close. So this is saying when the game starts, we're going to, by default, play this close animation. Now, if you don't want that to be the first state, and say we wanted to have a look at the door opening, we can select that state, right click on it, and go set as layer default state. It will go orange, and then when we press play, it will play this particular animation. So let's just have a look. Unity will automatically make it a looping animation. And that's fine for us at the moment. Because what we're going to do now is actually join these up into a cycle of opening and closing. So let's just arrange these into a shape like this. What they look like in here doesn't make any difference, but it just helps us to envisage what's going on. So let's start the door in close, because it is closed. So we will set that as our default animation. Now, once that's finished playing, we want to transition from close to opening. To do that, we right click on close and then select make transition. And we'll now have control over this arrow, and we can put that on any state we like. So we want to put it on the opening state. So it'll go from close and then it will do an opening. If we run this at this point, you'll be able to see that playing. So the close animation runs and it then automatically transitions to the opening animation. This animation, remember, is set to loop. So whatever animation the animation state finishes on will just continue to run. Okay, so we want to now transition from opening to close, so we can create another transition. And then we want to go from open to closing, and then we want to go back to close. So this is going to be our loop of animations. Let's run it and see what happens. The way this is working is that each animation state runs for a second each. And you can see them firing off. So the blue line through each is showing you how far through the animation it is. And each time a transition fires, it also shows up in blue. So you can see the way that the animation is running. Okay, so if we wanted to make the opening and closing a little bit longer, say 3 seconds, then we need to move the final keyframes of those animations. So let's just press stop, go back to our animation window. Now we've got the opening one here, so I'm just going to zoom out using the scroll on the mouse, and I can grab the very topmost keyframe for all of our animations and drag that out, zoom out a bit further and go to 3 seconds to make that animation 3 seconds long. And the closing one will also make 3 seconds long. Okay, so now if we run this, you'll find that the opening is much slower. At this point, how much it is closed and how much it is open is not important. In the next lecture, we'll actually look at controlling this with some script and add some triggers into the environment and a character that can walk up to the door and have it automatically open for you. So that's the Animator window. We're going to be working with this a lot because these states and transitions are very important in the process of creating complex animations, and we'll also create some very simple code that starts to control when and how these animations move. In this lecture, I'm going to show you how to trigger these doors to open automatically when your player character walks up to them. So in the last lecture, we created this animation states, and if I just play it for you, you can see that the door will open and close on a loop. So it's just going round and round these animation states. And if you want to see them in action, you can click on the object that's actually performing the animations in the hierarchy, and it will show you these animations as they're running. Okay, so to begin with, let's stop playing. So first of all, to trigger this door to open when we walk up to it, we need a character that will walk up to it. Now you can grab these characters if you go to the main menu and select Assets, Import Package, and then Characters. This will bring in all of the different types of characters that come with Unity. Now once you've gone import, you'll get this box pop up. Just click import and that will bring all of those things into your project for you. Now it's going to put the objects that it creates into a folder called standard assets, and you'll find that inside of the assets folder once it's all loaded. Right, now we've got that imported and you can see the standard assets folder. You're looking for characters, and inside characters we're after a first person controller, and then we go into the prefab. So these are characters that have been set up for us so we don't have to create them. You want to find the one called the FPS controller. It's going to be the blue box with a little arrow next to it. The arrow means there's other things inside it, which is including all of the scripts that are attached to it. So we don't need to write any of these things. Grab that first person controller and drag and drop it into the scene. Now you'll see that it's also got a camera attached to it. If you just release it, you're going to find that it's got a lot of other things attached to it as well, as sounds. It has its own collider that you can see as that capsule collider in the green. It has no physical body that you're going to be able to see because it is first person. So the camera is attached to it. Now you'll want to lift it up so that the capsule is above the ground. If you start playing and your character is a certain distance below the ground, it will just fall straight through it. The physics system won't pick it up. So just lift it up a little bit because it doesn't matter if you fall and land on the ground when we're first starting. Now, before you play, we've got a problem where there's now two cameras. There's the camera that came with our character and there's the camera that was in there before. So select the main camera that you were using before, and we will just delete that out of the scene so there's only one camera on our FPS controller. At this point, if we run, you'll be able to look around with the mouse and move with the arrow keys or the WASD keys, whichever ones you prefer. And we can see there our door going through the cycle of opening and closing. So our objective now is to walk up to the door while it's closed, have it open and be able to walk through it and then have it close again. Now, once you're in this mode, you'll notice that your mouse has disappeared. If you want your mouse back, just hit the escape key and then you can stop that from playing. Okay, so the next step is to put an object on this door that will be able to tell when the player has got close enough to the door, which will trigger it to open. In the game environment, to determine when one object has run into another, we can use the physics system. And we actually do a little trick with the physics system so that it doesn't cause physics on our character, but it will trigger events. Right, so this object we're going to create as a trigger for our door is going to sit around the door. So we actually want it to come out here and then on the other side be out here as well, so you can actually walk over the top of it. Or in this case, it'll be walking through it, but it'll be faking that there's a pressure plate or something here to walk onto. So find the door, which is the child of the door frame part. This is the one that has the animation on it. Now, what we want to do here is to right-click on it, 3D object, and add a cube. Now, that's going to add a default cube that we'll see down the bottom here. Now, if we just lift that up a little bit, it doesn't have to be perfectly aligned with the floor. Actually, you probably want it to be slightly like that. It has to be big enough that when our player character runs into it, it's going to trigger it. Right, now we want it to be all the way across the door, so I've just hit the R key and I'm grabbing hold of this sideways resizer in that direction, and then I also want to resize it in this direction as well. Now, as I do that, because the center of the cube is almost near the door, in fact, if we even just hit W and just move it back so it's aligned with the door, and if I just hold down the Alt key and swivel around, you'll see that it's also come out this way. Now, that door takes 3 seconds to open, and therefore we probably want to just resize it a little bit bigger so that it starts opening from back here. If we run it now, just to see what's going to happen, you can see that we've got this cube with a collider on it. It's attached to the door and it's actually moving with the door. If I walk up to it, my character is going to run into it and it will actually stop it. And if I stand underneath it, it's going to push on my character and push it down through the ground. So it's still got the physics system working on it as far as a collision type thing happening on the character. We don't want that cube to be that sort of collider. So we can make it into just a trigger so that it will trigger events. Click on the cube in the hierarchy. Let's call this door trigger, just so that we know which one we're talking about. Now, if you have a look in the inspector, you'll see that there's a box collider attached to it, which is fair enough because it is a cube, but we don't want it to act like a normal collider. So we turn it into a trigger with this is trigger setting here. Just tick that box. Now, if we run this, it will allow us to walk right up to it and it won't even be like it's there at all. So I'm walking straight through it at this point. It's not doing anything to us. And it can even go straight through our character. Okay, so we now have this trigger and we need to link it up with the animations that we created previously, because this door is now just opening and closing on this loop. So instead of doing that, we don't want the door to go into an opening state unless we've run into this trigger system here. That means we put a condition on this transition. So we say that this transition can't run unless a certain condition is met in the game environment. And until that condition is met, then you're just going to have to stay in the closed state. So to create these conditions or parameters that we're putting on of this thing here, if you have a look in the Animator window right up in the top left-hand corner, there's a little parameters tab. So select that and then click on this plus next to here, and that'll allow you to create a new parameter. We're going to create a Boolean parameter, and we're going to call it isOpening. So isOpening, when it becomes true, then it will start opening the door, and when it becomes false, it will start closing the door. So how do we use this and link it up with our cycle that we've got going on here? Select the transition that's going from close to open. Then in the inspector, you'll see that there's a spot in there for the conditions in which that transition will actually run. And we can press on the plus, which will automatically add the first parameter in our list, which is our isOpening. And it will set it to true. Or it will say that it's true. So when isOpening is true is the only time that this cycle will actually go along this transition and then hit the opening state. So if we run it at this point without doing anything else, that door is going to remain closed because that parameter that we've put on this transition is going to stop it from going along here and go around this loop. So let's just play. And you'll now see that our door is permanently in that closed state. And even if you look over here to the animation state for close, you can see that it's constantly just looping through that closed state there. Next, we'll want the same thing to happen for when the door is open and going into the closing state. Once it's open, we don't want it to close until our isOpening parameter becomes false. So select that transition, and then in the inspector you want to add the new condition, which is again going to be isOpening, but this time isOpening will be set to false, which will then cause this part to trigger. So when isOpening is true, it will go from closed to opening to open, and it'll stay open. It won't go into the closing until isOpening becomes false. So that completes our little cycle that's going on here with these transitions. Now we have to do a little bit of programming to cause this isOpening value here to change from true and false. And when we want it to change from true and false will depend on where our player character is with respect to this trigger cube that we've added in here. So when we run into this trigger cube, we actually want to set that isOpening parameter here to become true, which will trigger this and the opening will occur. All right, so now it's time just to write a little bit of code. And we'll do that in the next lecture. To create our code, we do that in the project with our other objects that we created before. But you select the Create button and drop it down and go to C# script. As soon as you click on that, it will create a C# script file and it's ready to accept a name. Let's call this door controller. Now, we don't have enough time in these lectures to go over programming, but I'll try and point out a few tips and tricks to ensure that you get as least amount of bugs as possible. So let's open our file up. Here's our script file. Now, you double click on it and it will open up in an editor. Now, the default editor will be MonoDevelop or it will be Visual Studio if you're on Windows machine. Now, if you want to set it to this editor, which is called Sublime Text, there's instructions in the frequently asked questions section earlier on in the first section of this course that you can find out how to do this. I prefer to use Sublime because it's a lot simpler and it loads really quickly. When you first open a script file, it's going to look like this by default. Now, we called it door controller down here. Whatever you name it down here will become the name of this class. This here and this here has to be spelt exactly the same. So capitals and everything. You can't use spaces in any names, so make sure that it's one word. Now, if you need to have, like I've got here with door controller with 2, then you can have a capital D and a capital C. That's fine. But it is essential that this is named the same as your file down here. All right, so next we have a start function that Unity runs when your script first runs, or when your object that the script is attached to comes into existence, or starts to play within the game, I should say. And that runs once, and then you have an update function which will run over and over again. So whatever code you put in here runs over and over again each frame of the game. Okay, so let's just concentrate on what we're trying to do with our triggering. Unity provides a couple of functions that allow us to trigger events when we run into a trigger object which we've created on that cube. Okay, so the function that Unity will look for is on trigger enter. So let's just add that in here. So it's void on trigger enter collider obj. Okay, each function that you write must have an opening and closing squiggly brackets, as you can see here, and they must match. So ensure that you've got those. Then inside of this function here, which Unity will run when we run into that trigger, we're going to set some code that's going to open up the door. Or what it's going to do is grab hold of this is opening that's over here and set it to true, which will cause this transition here to run. Now, we can't just go is opening true as simply as that here, although it's kind of close. We have to do a little bit of setting up. So this code doesn't actually know about this structure here, and we need to make it aware of the door's animation states. So just at the top here, we're going to set up what's called a variable called an animator, and we'll call it anim. So this animator is referring to this animator here, which is going to grab any particular animator, and we're going to refer to it in our code as anim because that's easy to type. So currently this is just any old anim, but we want it to point to our one that is on the door. So down in the start function is where we need to sort of initialize or set up that. And the code for that is anim equals this dot transform dot parent dot get component animator rounded brackets semicolon. Okay, so that's a bit of a mouthful. So let's just save that with a Control S, and I'm going to explain what it's doing. So we're going to get hold of the animator that is attached to the parent of this particular object that the script is going to be attached to. And the script, if I just move this over here, the script is going to go onto the door trigger. So the script is running from the door trigger, and it's going to go to the parent of that object and grab its animator. So it will ensure that it's going to go up, get the parent, and then get this animator here, which will now have access to what's going on in these animation states. Okay, so let's just open up our code again. And then once we have hold of this anim, we can then trigger that is opening. So it would be anim.setBool. We give it the name of the Boolean value that we've created on our transition, which is this is opening. Has to be spelled exactly the same with the same capitalization. Is opening inside double quotes, and we're setting it to be true, and then a semicolon at the end. Okay, so This is what we need. Make sure that you've got everything spelt right, that you've got semicolons on the end of things that need semicolons. Most lines of code have a semicolon to say this is the end of the line of code, because you can wrap lines of code around. Things that don't have semicolons, you'll notice, are the function starter lines and our squiggly bracket lines. But these things, like that line has a semicolon and that line has a semicolon. Okay, so this is as hard as it gets as far as making sure that this value here gets set to true, and that will make this here run. Okay, when this trigger event happens. And this trigger event's going to happen when our character runs into that cube. Okay, so Control S to save that. Switch back to Unity. Now, I haven't shut down that editor window, and you don't need to either, because you might come back and forward between the editor window. If you get any errors in your code, you'll see red messages across the bottom, and you can go to your console window. If you can't find your console window, it's in Window and then Console down the bottom here, and that will bring it up. It'll show you a list of errors. It'll show you the line number that the errors are on as well. So just make sure that you've typed it exactly as I've just shown you. Now, this code isn't going to run because it's not actually inside of our hierarchy. We want to add that code onto the door trigger. So select the door trigger in the hierarchy, grab hold of the code and drag and drop it onto that door trigger, and you'll see it appear here. Right, so if everything is now right, there's no errors, we should be able to press play and it will run. Okay, so let's walk up to the door. We go into there and you'll notice that we've triggered the event for it to open. Now, if I walk away from the door, it's not going to close. So we also need to put in another piece of code that says when we've exited the trigger, then we would like the door to go into a closing animation. So hitting escape to get out of there. Let's go back into our code. And this time we're going to have an on trigger exit function, which is pretty much like this. So we can just grab all of that and Control C, and just underneath Control V, we change this bit here to exit. So we have an enter and an exit. And when we exit, we're going to set is opening to false, like that. Right, so then we save that and we go back into here and run. So if I walk up to here, the door will open. Now, the door's going to automatically close because that cube will go above our heads, which will cause an exit to occur because we've exited from inside of that cube. So it's not perfect yet. So a few other things we can do is to actually make this cube much bigger so that when the door's fully open, that cube still goes down to the floor. So just select it and resize it. Again, you hit the R key to resize it, then the W key to bring it down lower so that we can still run into it. Then when we press play and the door opens right up, that should still be on the ground, which will mean that we will still be inside that cube and the door won't shut until we walk back out again. So we're still inside that cube, it's not shutting, but if I walk back and walk outside of that cube, it will play the close animation. Okay, so that's getting there. The other thing that's not happening, so if I walk into this and then walk straight out again, it's still going to trigger it to open and it'll wait those few seconds before it closes again. We can force it to immediately close and immediately open. If we go into this close here, rather than waiting for those 3 seconds to occur, for that 1 second to occur before closing, we can go over into this inspector for the transition where we added is opening true, And you can turn off this has exit time. So it's not going to fully wait for the close state to finish running before it starts opening. And you can do that also with the open one as well, is that we can get rid of this has exit time so it won't stay fully open at the top. And finally, it looks pretty ugly to be walking around an environment with a huge big cube opening and closing the door. So select the cube and you can turn off its mesh renderer in the inspector here. So this is the part that's actually drawing the cube. If we just untick it, you'll see that you've still got the collider, which is in the green, but you're not going to be able to see it in the game. I use the cube's mesh render so that we can see what's going on when we're designing it, but we can turn it off when we go to play. So now when we play, we should be able to walk up to the door and it will open for us, and we can walk away and turn around and it should be closing behind us. And then we should be able to go back up and through it again. Okay, so that's how to create a trigger to control the transitions in our animation state diagram that is attached to our door object. Thanks for watching. Please support the development of more superb online learning content by subscribing, and as always, visit holistic3d.com to learn more about awesome games development books and tutorials.